The Industrial Revolution and its impact. Level B. 1. Intermediate. The Industrial Revolution was one of the most important events in human history. It changed the way people lived, worked, and thought. Before the Industrial Revolution, most people lived in small villages and worked in agriculture. They used simple tools, and almost everything was made by hand. But starting in the 18th century, machines began to appear, and they changed everything. The beginning of the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution began in Britain around the 1762. There were several reasons why it started there. Britain had many natural resources, such as coal and iron ore. These were very important for building machines and factories. The country also had many rivers, which were used for transport and for powering water mills. In addition, Britain had colonies all over the world, which provided raw materials like cotton and a market for finished products. Another important reason was that Britain was politically stable. There were no major wars inside the country at that time, and the government supported trade and business. Many scientists and inventors were also working in Britain. They created new machines and found better ways to produce goods. The textile industry. The first major industry to change was the textile industry. Before the Industrial Revolution, clothes and fabrics were made by hand in people's homes. This was called the domestic system. Families worked together, spinning wool or cotton into thread and then weaving it into cloth. It was slow and took a lot of time. Then, new machines were invented. The spinning jenny, created by James Hargreaves, allowed one worker to spin several threads at once. Later, Richard Arkwright invented the water frame, which used water power to run the spinning machines. Samuel Crompton's spinning mule combined both ideas, producing stronger and finer thread. Finally, Edmund Cartwright's power loom made weaving faster and easier. All these inventions led to the building of factories. People no longer worked at home, they had to go to large buildings where the machines were. This was the birth of the factory system. The steam engine. Another key invention was the steam engine. It was improved by James Watt in the late 18th century. The steam engine was very important because it could power many different kinds of machines. It didn't depend on water or wind, so factories could be built anywhere, not just near rivers. Steam engines were also used in transportation, such as in trains and ships. This allowed goods and people to move much faster than before. Life in the cities. As factories grew, many people left the countryside and moved to cities to find work. This process is called urbanization. Cities like Manchester, Birmingham, and London became industrial centers. However, life in these new industrial cities was not easy. People worked long hours, sometimes up to 14 or 16 hours a day. Wages were low, and working conditions were often dangerous. Factories were hot, noisy, and dirty. There were no safety rules, and accidents were common. Child labor was also widespread. Many children as young as 6 or 7 worked in factories or mines because their families needed money. Living conditions were also poor. Many workers lived in small, crowded houses with no clean water or proper toilets. Diseases spread quickly, and there were few doctors. The air was polluted with smoke from factories, and the rivers were full of waste. Social changes. The Industrial Revolution brought not only new machines, but also big changes in society. Before, people were divided into a few main groups, the rich landowners and the poor peasants. But now a new social class appeared, the working class, or proletariat, made up of factory workers. Another new group was the middle class, which included factory owners, merchants, and professionals like doctors and engineers. These people became very influential and helped shape the modern world. At first, the gap between rich and poor was very large. Factory owners became very rich, while workers lived in poverty. This led to social tensions and protests. Over time, workers began to form labor unions to demand better conditions, shorter working hours, and fair pay. Their efforts helped to improve workers' rights in many countries. Transportation Revolution. One of the most visible results of the Industrial Revolution was the improvement of transportation. The invention of the steam engine led to the creation of the steam train and the steamship. Before that, travel was slow and expensive. People used horses or simple wagons, and ships depended on wind. When the first steam locomotives appeared, they completely changed travel. The first public railway opened in 1825 inches, England. It connected the towns of Stockton and Darlington. Later, George Stephenson built a faster and stronger locomotive called the Rocket. Soon, railways spread all over Britain and Europe. Trains could carry large amounts of goods and people over long distances quickly and cheaply. This helped trade grow and made it easier for people to travel to new places. Cities and towns that were connected by railways developed faster. Steamships also transformed international trade. Before steam power, ships depended on wind, which made long trips uncertain and slow. Steamships could travel faster and follow regular routes. This connected different parts of the world more closely and helped global trade expand. The Agricultural Revolution. The Industrial Revolution was also connected to big changes in agriculture. Before it, most people worked on farms, and farming methods were very simple. But in the 18th century, new techniques and tools appeared. This period is often called the Agricultural Revolution. Farmers began to use crop rotation, growing different crops in the same field each year to keep the soil healthy. They also started using new machines, like the seed drill invented by Jethro Tull, which made planting more efficient. Selective breeding of animals helped produce stronger and healthier livestock. All these changes meant that fewer people were needed to work on farms. At the same time, food production increased. This allowed more people to move to cities and work in factories. In this way, the Agricultural Revolution helped create the conditions for the Industrial Revolution. The spread of industrialization. At first, industrialization was limited to Britain, but soon it spread to other parts of Europe and the world. Countries like France, Germany, Belgium, and the United States began to build their own factories. They learned from British inventions, but also developed their own technologies. In the United States, for example, the textile industry grew rapidly in the early 19th century. American inventors also contributed new ideas. Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin, which made cleaning cotton much faster. Later, the use of interchangeable parts made it possible to produce goods like guns and machines more efficiently. Germany became an industrial power later in the 19th century. It focused on chemicals, steel, and machinery. By the end of the century, industrialization had reached many other parts of the world, including Japan and Russia. The world was becoming more connected than ever before. Science, technology, and innovation. The Industrial Revolution also encouraged scientific progress. People wanted to understand how machines worked and how to make them better. Engineers, chemists, and inventors began to collaborate. There were many discoveries and inventions during this period. In addition to the steam engine, there was the telegraph, which allowed messages to be sent quickly over long distances. Later came photography, the telephone, and electricity. Each new invention changed the way people communicated, worked, or lived. Science also began to influence industry more directly. For example, in the chemical industry, scientists developed new dyes, fertilizers, and materials. In medicine, better understanding of germs and hygiene helped reduce diseases in cities. Step by step, science became an essential part of industrial progress. The role of the British Empire. The Industrial Revolution made Britain the richest and most powerful country in the world. Factories produced huge amounts of goods, and British merchants needed new markets to sell them. At the same time, industries required raw materials like cotton, rubber, and metals, which often came from other parts of the world. The British Empire grew quickly during this time. Colonies in Asia, Africa, and the Americas became important sources of raw materials and places where British products could be sold. For example, cotton was imported from India and the southern United States, while coal and steel were exported to many other countries. The empire also built railways, ports, and telegraph lines in its colonies to make trade easier. While this helped some regions develop, it also meant that local industries and cultures were often damaged. Many people in colonies were forced to work under poor conditions, for little or no pay. This part of history is still controversial today. Women and children in the Industrial Age. During the Industrial Revolution, both women and children worked in factories, often under terrible conditions. Employers hired them because they could be paid less than men. Many women worked as textile workers, spinners, or weavers. Children were often used in mines or factories because they were small and could fit into tight spaces between machines. In the beginning, no one thought this was wrong. People simply needed to survive. But over time, reformers and writers began to speak out against these unfair conditions. They wrote about the long hours, the dirt, and the dangers. Doctors and social activists showed how child labor harmed children's health. Thanks to their efforts, governments began to pass new laws. In Britain, for example, the Factory Acts were introduced in the 19th century. These laws limited working hours for children and women, and they made working conditions safer. Schools also became more common, and education became compulsory for children. This slowly changed society, allowing more people to learn and improve their lives. Education and the new workforce. The Industrial Revolution showed the importance of education. New machines required skilled workers who could read instructions and understand technology. As a result, many governments started to invest in public education. More schools were built, and people from different social backgrounds gained access to learning. This also helped the growth of science and engineering. Universities created new programs in chemistry, physics, and mechanics. Education became a path to better jobs and a better life, especially for the middle class. At the same time, literacy rates increased dramatically. More people could read newspapers and books. This helped spread ideas about democracy, equality, and human rights. The industrial world needed educated citizens, and education became one of the main forces of progress. Changes in daily life. The Industrial Revolution completely changed everyday life. People began to use products that were once very expensive or rare. Clothes became cheaper, furniture was mass-produced, and cities offered new forms of entertainment. Public transport made it possible to live farther from work. Trains, trams, and later buses connected people to their jobs and to the growing centers of culture. Streets began to have gas lamps and, later, electric lights. This made cities brighter and safer at night. Shops and department stores appeared, offering a variety of goods. The idea of shopping as an activity was born. The middle class started to enjoy more free time, which led to the creation of leisure activities, parks, museums, theaters, and sports clubs. For the first time in history, ordinary people began to think not only about survival, but also about comfort and pleasure. The dark side of industrialization. However, industrialization also had many negative effects. Pollution became a serious problem. Coal was the main source of energy, and smoke from factories filled the air. Rivers and canals were used to dump waste from factories, poisoning the water. In big cities, the air was thick with soot, and buildings were covered in black dust. Many people suffered from respiratory diseases. Even though industrial progress brought wealth, it also damaged the environment. Workers lived in crowded areas with poor sanitation. Diseases like cholera and tuberculosis spread quickly. There were no modern sewage systems at first, and garbage often lay in the streets. Only later, when cities grew richer, did governments begin to build better infrastructure, clean water systems, public parks, and hospitals. The rise of the working class movement. As more people worked in factories, they began to realize that they shared the same problems and goals. They wanted better pay, safer conditions, and shorter working days. In many countries, workers started to organize strikes and protests. In Britain, the Chartist movement of the 1,830 seconds and 1,840 seconds demanded political rights for workers, including the right to vote. Labor unions also became stronger. They negotiated with employers and sometimes went on strike to defend workers' rights. Although the process was long and difficult, these movements led to major social changes. Governments began to pass laws protecting workers, setting limits on working hours, and improving safety standards. The idea of social justice started to grow, and democracy became stronger. Cultural changes. The Industrial Revolution didn't just change how people worked, it also changed how they thought and created art. Writers, artists, and philosophers tried to understand the new world that was appearing around them. Some people were excited by progress and technology. They believed that machines would solve all human problems. Others, however, felt that something important was being lost: nature, beauty, and human connection. The Romantic movement in art and literature, which included writers like William Wordsworth and painters like J.M.W. Turner, was a reaction to industrialization. They celebrated nature, emotion, and the individual. Later, in the 19th century, the realist movement appeared, showing the hard lives of workers and the poor in industrial cities. These cultural reactions helped people think more deeply about what progress really meant. The global impact of industrialization. By the late 19th century, the Industrial Revolution had spread far beyond Europe. The United States became one of the leading industrial powers, with cities like New York, Chicago, and Pittsburgh full of factories and railways. Japan, after the Meiji Restoration in 1868, began to modernize rapidly. It built factories, railways, and a strong navy, becoming the first Asian industrial power. Other regions, however, were slower to industrialize and often became suppliers of raw materials for richer nations. Industrialization also increased competition between countries. European powers raced to control new territories, which led to colonialism and later to conflicts. Some historians believe that the Industrial Revolution was one of the reasons behind the Great Wars of the 20th century. The Second Industrial Revolution. The First Industrial Revolution was based on coal, iron, and steam. But in the late 19th century, a second phase began. This Second Industrial Revolution brought new forms of energy, electricity, oil, and gas. New inventions appeared: the telephone, the light bulb, the car, and the airplane. Steel replaced iron as the main building material. Mass production became common thanks to assembly lines, first used by Henry Ford in his automobile factories. These changes made goods cheaper and more available. Life became faster and more connected. The world was entering the modern era. The environment and the planet. Today, we can clearly see that the Industrial Revolution changed the planet forever. It gave us progress, comfort, and science, but also pollution, deforestation, and climate change. Factories and machines burned huge amounts of coal and oil, releasing carbon dioxide into the air. Forests were cut down to make space for cities and farms. Rivers were used for industrial waste. At the time, people didn't understand how dangerous this was. They thought nature was endless and could recover easily. Only in the 20th and 21st centuries did humanity begin to see the long-term effects of industrialization on the climate. Now, many countries are trying to move toward cleaner technologies, renewable energy, recycling, and electric transport to fix the damage caused by the first industrial centuries. Women's rights and social progress. The Industrial Revolution also played a role in changing women's position in society. At first, women worked mainly in factories or as domestic servants. But industrialization created new kinds of jobs in education, nursing, and later in offices. Women became more visible in the public sphere and started to demand equal rights. The suffragette movement in Britain and the United States fought for women's right to vote. Over time, their efforts succeeded, and women gained more independence and opportunities. Education also gave women new chances. Female teachers, writers, and scientists began to appear. Industrial progress slowly pushed society toward gender equality, though there is still a long way to go in many parts of the world. The world we live in. Almost everything in our modern world has roots in the Industrial Revolution. The cars we drive, the electricity we use, the clothes we wear, all come from systems that began during that period. The idea of constant progress, of inventing and improving things, is also a legacy of industrialization. Factories, science, and trade created a global economy that connects all countries today. However, the revolution also taught us an important lesson. Progress must be balanced with care for people and the environment. Modern society continues to face the same questions: how to grow, how to share wealth fairly, and how to protect our planet. Conclusion. The Industrial Revolution was a time of incredible change. It turned farming societies into industrial ones, created new technologies, and shaped the modern world. It brought both great benefits and serious problems. It showed humanity's power to invent and create but also the dangers of greed and pollution. The story of the Industrial Revolution is not just history, it is a reminder that progress must always serve people, not the other way around. Today, as we live in the digital and technological age, we are experiencing another kind of revolution. By looking back at the Industrial Revolution, we can learn how to build a better, fairer, and more sustainable future.